Hello, my name is Brian Chin. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the basics of music notation and musical handwriting. This is a little bit different than what prints on Finale or Sibelius, and there's a lot of different kind of individualized approaches. What I'm going to share with you today are some universal truths in musical handwriting and kind of a generalized approach. Keep in mind that the better you get and the closer you are to making your music look like what I'm going to show you, the better you musicians will read this in performance. In general, any vertical lines are made top to bottom and skinny. Any short lines, or I should say any horizontal lines, are made short and fat. What that means is with a pencil or a ballpoint pen, you need to go over it a few times. Most of the icons that we're going to make, like our clef signs and our time signatures, are oversized, and your music will look different, significantly different, than what prints on Finale or Sibelius. I have my students always use a straight edge for anything vertical and anything that is going to be performed. For the purpose of today, I'm going to use this ruler, and I use this a lot on my own music. I have my students use their ID card because they have it with them at all times, and it works as a perfect pencil straight edge. Typically, the first mark on your page is going to be the clef sign. The most common of these clefs is the treble clef, drawn like this. I start above the staff, go straight down, and go below the staff, about the length of another line. I then go to the right over what the note G would be, and circle around, loop around over where the low G would be. This is known as a G clef. There are many individual styles of this, and a common student mistake is to do this, making it too small and housing it completely within. When in doubt, make it too big and it still will be recognized as a treble clef. A bass clef is made on the fourth line, what would be the note F, looping around to the top line, generally to the bottom line, all contained within the staff. Traditionally, there are two dots here. Most people leave those out. If you're using both clefs, as in a grand staff, mark it with your vertical line in your staff with a bar line on the end. Tradition has a bracket on the outside of these. Many different styles of this. You could do this, or draw some kind of double bar with a bracket on either side. I recommend stopping the video here and practicing a line or two of treble and bass clefs. The next component to write on your paper is the key signature. Flats look like this: straight up and down, up to the point, to the loop, and then down to the point, so that it looks like a squished lowercase b. What you don't want is rounded bottom that looks like this. That actually could be mistaken for a note with the stem on the wrong side. Very common student mistake. Sharps look like this: two long skinny lines, about an octave in length, relatively close together, two short fat lines up and to the right. Common student mistake here is to make these too small, like this, or even like this, which make it look like a tic-tac-toe sign. Very difficult to read and oftentimes confused. Natural signs are made like this: straight down about an octave, to the right, slight angle from above, and straight down about an octave. This makes it very easy to read, and notice that it's quite easy to make, always down and over. The order of flats always looks like this: start in the middle line, up, down, up, down, up, down. In the bass clef, it's the same thing. Notice that this all slides down. When doing sharps, goes in this order: F, about an octave, C, about an octave, G, D, A, E, B. Keep in mind here, I think of it as groups of 2, 3, 2. 2 going down, 3 going down, 2 going down. Lumps it all together. Bass clef works in the same order. F, C, G, D, A, E, B. Notice 2, 3, 2, all this way. I recommend stopping the video here and practicing writing your key signatures. Time signatures serve to establish the meter, but also practically separate the key signature from the start of your music notes. Here, notice that all the time signatures are larger than the staff and meet in the middle line regardless of the clef. A 4-4 would look like this. A 3-4 would look like this, meeting in the middle line. Bass clef is the exact same way. 6-8 meets in the middle, larger than the staff. The time signature is written only once in your music, unlike the clef and key signature, which is written on every line. For example, if my second line were to do this, I would still put the clef, I would still put the key signature, but I don't need a time signature. Instead, I use a line like this to separate the two from the start of my music. This is a visual cue that you don't find in Sibelius or Finale that is quite important when writing handwritten music. Practice writing time signatures here. By far, the most important concept to understand in handwritten notation is the concept of spacing. The next item to do when starting to handwrite music is to space out your bar lines. These go straight up and down using your ruler and space them this way. Cap the end of the line first, the bar line. Next, split the middle between the two, between your time signature and the end. This will give me 4 even bars. Notice I'm using my ruler to create these. These go to the bottom line, to the bottom line, to the top line. Next, I split these two in half evenly. What this does is create 4 even measures. It's important to do that so that you're not adding as you go, which oftentimes has a student doing this, seeing the end of the bar line, and then needing to fill in the space. This is very hard to read, and your instrumentalists and vocalists will not appreciate that. In handwritten music, your final bar line is a double line. Thick, thin, and the tradition here in handwritten music is to always bracket this. This makes it visually much easier to read. You do the same thing if this was a repeat sign. Put 2 dots here, bigger, everything oversized. And let's say we're repeating here, we would do the same thing. Thick line, inside, thin line. For a thick line with the pencil, you got to go more than once. I recommend practicing your bar lines. Set up a page or so, practice your repeat signs and your end bar lines. Note heads are actually egg-shaped and at a slight angle. They are the same size as the staff lines you are writing on. They're the same size regardless if they're filled in like a quarter note or if they're left open like a half or a whole note. A common mistake is to make this a perfect circle or too big or too small. The most important thing to do in music notation is spacing. Here I got to make sure that I can still see the implied rhythm by the note heads alone. I can almost read those rhythms by itself based on spacing. Any accidentals go before the note head, about an octave in length, and 2 short fat ones going this way, 2 long skinny ones vertical. When notating in alphabetic letters, we put the accidentals behind the note like we speak it. Notice I write them above the note. When I'm writing note heads, always in front. The next thing to go on my staff here is a stem. Stems work the same way regardless of clef. Stems are perfectly vertical and are about an octave in length if the note is in the staff. For example, my F sharp here would go to the F sharp line an octave higher. Use my straight edge for clarity. That would work for all of these notes. Any note that is below the middle line, the stems go up. Any note that is above the middle line, the stems go down. One exception to this rule is if my note is above or below the staff on a ledger line. To write ledger lines, use your ruler to make sure that you're consistent across, especially if there's more than one. And mimic the spacing of the paper staff that you're working with. A common mistake here is to slop these up here in such a way that you can't tell at first glance if that's higher or lower based on the ledger line. Make sure it's a little bit longer than the note head will be. And now the stem rule is that you go to the middle line as opposed to the octave below. The most common student mistake I see is to create quarter notes that look like this. Occasionally I see this, quarter notes that have stems up on the right side. The other common problem, students will oftentimes make their stems way too short. Or worse, like this. Notes within the same beat can be beamed together. Make sure here that you use your pencil to make a thick horizontal line. It can be very difficult to read thin horizontal lines. For example, a thin horizontal line makes this very difficult to read. Go back and forth with your pencil a few times, and now it's quite easy. In 4/4 time, it is commonly acceptable to be able to beam 2 beats of quarter note beat length together, so long as the bar can visually divide in half. In other words, you could beam these beats together under 1 as so long as I can visually divide this in half. It would be the correct way to write this by splitting these two so that visually I can divide the bar in half like this and don't get confused by these two beats beamed together in the middle. Technically, 1 beam per beat, regardless of time signature. In 6/8 time, for example, notice my spacing here, being careful to make sure that's even spacing. In 6/8 time, our beat is traditionally the dotted quarter note. So I beam 3 of these eighth notes together as such to make this very clear as a group of 3 within 1 dotted quarter note. When creating an eighth note that's all by itself without a whole beat to beam together, we create a flag. This flag is made this way. I go up as usual on my stem, sorry, from the top always. Then I come back and a same vertical stroke from the top to the bottom towards the note head, loop around this way, always to the right. If the note is above the staff, or above the middle line on the staff, you do the same thing, loop around this way from the top, come back this way towards the loop, towards the note head. If I'm using a dot, as in a dotted quarter note, make sure that the dot goes in the space, regardless of where you are. If my note happens to be this, on a line, make sure that the dot is the space above. This works the same regardless of stem direction. dot goes here. Notice that this could be confusing, hard to read. A common problem, occasionally you see this, which is almost impossible. When writing rests, it is important to keep the same spacing guidelines as before. The only real exception here is that when you're writing a whole note, the whole note goes at the beginning of the bar, whereas a whole rest goes into the middle of the bar, as so. A whole rest is a line, a double fat line like this, hanging off of the middle line. I was taught to think of that as a hole that you fall into, whole rest. A half rest is on top of the middle line like this. Notice that it's halfway between the middle of the bar. My half note would go here at the beginning of the next section. When writing quarter rests, make sure that you're in the same spot as where a quarter note normally would be. This is the only stroke that starts from the bottom and goes to the top. The first part, it's actually in three parts. First part starts at the bottom line, goes to the middle line like this, back down to the second line. The next step is to draw a straight line vertically up to the left to the fourth line. The next stroke circles back around to the top line like this. The quarter rest takes quite a bit of practice, but you can do it quite quickly once you get the stroke down. I've seen some students do this, which is very difficult to read. You're not quite sure what you're looking at. And I've seen some students be able to figure out how to do this from the top stroke, which is totally fine. I do find that it's quite quick once you master it, going from the bottom, and it's all in one quick stroke. Notice that it has the same spacing as a quarter note. If I'm going to put an eighth rest here, it looks like this. If I have a 16th note, you do the same thing like that. Add a little flag. I recommend starting by writing a line of each element we have talked about and then copying some music that you already have into handwritten notation.